I'll cool down the fever, so take care of the rest. I received an unexpected call from my sister-in-law while I was at work. At first, I couldn't understand what she was talking about. She said that she had put her 2-month-old baby, who had a 40-degree fever, into my fridge. I'm going on an overseas trip. With that, she abruptly ended the call. I hurried home and checked inside the fridge, but by the time I found my niece, she had already stopped breathing. My anger toward her irresponsibility reached its peak, and I resolved to punish her. I met my husband, who is 2 years older than me, through a mutual friend, and we got married when I was 34. People around us often said, the clumsy Luke and the reliable Abby make a great pair. Indeed, he did have some absent-minded moments, but I was always comforted by his gentle and kind nature. A year passed, and though we hadn't had children yet, we enjoyed a fulfilling life by traveling together on days off when our schedules aligned. Amidst these happy days, however, I had one concern: Luke's younger sister, Allison. They have a significant age gap, and my husband tends to be a little too lenient with her. This was a quiet source of stress for me. We built a house near Luke's family home, and close by, Allison lived with her husband in an apartment. She often barged into our home, relying on my husband. Big brother. She would barge in without even saying excuse me when the door opened, making a beeline for Luke. So, I'm a bit short on money this month. Can you help out?
Again. Aren't you managing your household budget properly?
I am. But my husband's salary is so low. We spend more than we make. It seemed like Allison didn't have much money for herself, and she would often come to my husband to beg for it.
You could get a full-time job or something.
Well, my husband wants me to stay home. I was always exasperated by her contradictory, nonsensical remarks, but to Luke, she was probably just his adorable little sister. Though he would say things like, "This is the last time," I had caught him giving her money from his own allowance several times. Well, at least he's not dipping into our savings. Thinking that way, I tolerated it, but then something happened that made me lose all trust in Allison. I was in the kitchen making tea when she left the room, saying she was going to the bathroom. When she didn't return after some time, I went to check and found that the bedroom door, which should have been closed, was open, and she was rummaging through the closet. "What are you doing, Allison?" "Oh, Abby? Perfect timing. I'm borrowing this dress." With my favorite dress in hand, she quickly returned to the living room, grabbed her bag, and headed for the front door. "I didn't say you could take it." "Don't be stingy. I'll return it, don't worry." Ignoring my protests. "See ya." She waved her hand and left. When I told my husband about it, he immediately tried to call her, but she didn't pick up and didn't call back either. She said she'll return it, so I'll wait for a bit. I decided to trust her words. A few weeks later, she returned the dress, but I was horrified when I saw it. It was shoved into a bag in a crumpled state, with a large stain as if something had been spilled on it. "Allison, what is this?" Suppressing my anger, I asked her as calmly as possible. "I returned it, didn't I?" "That's not the issue. It's filthy." "What happened?" "Oh, I got drunk and accidentally spilled something." "It'll come out if you take it to the cleaners," right? She spoke as if it was someone else's problem, and even though I knew nothing I said would get through to her, I couldn't suppress my frustration. Then you clean it properly before returning it. And don't just take my clothes without asking anymore. I said it more sternly than usual, and while Allison looked dumbfounded for a moment, I thought she had finally learned her lesson. But then she started grinning. Oh, Abby, don't be mad. Look, when someone young and cute wears it, don't you think the dress looks happier too? She showed me her social media page on her phone. Instead of apologizing, she was trying to one-up me. Seeing that, I lost the energy to even argue. Luke, who had been watching nearby, quickly scolded her, but she didn't seem to reflect on her actions at all. What's the big deal? I'm just speaking the truth. She even sulked and turned away, pouting. No matter how much my husband lectured her, it didn't seem to get through to her, and she acted like she didn't take him seriously at all. It's hard to cut ties with a sibling, even if you want to. Then one day, we found out Allison was pregnant. At the same time, her husband, Tim, was transferred to a different prefecture for work. With some distance, maybe I won't have to deal with this as much anymore. I thought she would go with him, and I secretly hoped for that. Tim's going on a solo assignment, so I might need your help more often. But Allison decided to stay behind. Apparently, she cried to Tim, saying she was too anxious about being pregnant for the first time, and with no one nearby to rely on, it was tough. She wanted to stay in her current apartment and give birth in a more comfortable environment, near her family and us. That makes sense. So my husband and I decided to help out as much as we could. When her morning sickness was bad, I did her grocery shopping, and Luke would check on her after work. Thanks, I really appreciate it. I knew staying here was the right choice. Seeing Allison express genuine gratitude made me feel like she was changing for the better. But my relief didn't last long. As soon as she entered her second trimester and her health stabilized, she started going out, saying, "I won't be able to go out once the baby's born." She went out day and night, wearing light clothing that looked too cold, and high heels. I'm worried about her health and their finances too. I was secretly concerned, but without any major problems, she quickly reached her due date and gave birth to a healthy baby girl. They named her Maddie. After spending some time at her parents' house, she returned to her apartment and started visiting us frequently. "Big brother, Abby, are you home?" She would shout while holding Maddie, without ringing the doorbell, so I had no choice but to answer. She probably did this on purpose, timing her visits for when we were off or when we'd be home. Great, I need to go out for a bit, so can you take care of Maddie? She would drop off a big bag full of diapers and milk and shove my niece into my arms. You can't just spring this on me. I need a break, or I'll go crazy. Besides, think of it as practice for when you have your own kids. With that, she turned around and left. I couldn't help but feel uneasy seeing her heavy makeup and revealing outfit, even more so than usual. A month passed, and Maddie was now 2 months old. Allison continued leaving Maddie with us frequently, but my husband and I were so charmed by her cuteness that we didn't mind. Then one day, while both my husband and I were at work and I had just started my break, Allison called. "Hey, Abby? I need you to take care of Maddie now." I can't right now. I'm working until this evening. Oh, I see. Well, I'll cool down her fever, so take care of her afterward, okay? I didn't understand what she meant. What do you mean? Apparently, Maddie had a 40-degree fever, but Allison was going on an overseas trip later that day. You can't come home now, right? I have to leave soon, so I'll just put her in the fridge. I couldn't comprehend what she was saying. Are you joking? Just as I raised my voice, the call ended. I tried calling her back immediately, but she didn't pick up. I also contacted Luke and asked him to call Allison. I'll leave work early and head home now, so can you check on her place? Hoping it was all a terrible joke, I rushed home and opened the fridge. There I found Maddie's lifeless body. Wrapped in a towel, my niece lay there before my eyes. I immediately pulled her out of the fridge and held Maddie close, but it seemed her breathing had already stopped. What in the world? I was in complete shock, but I couldn't waste any more time. I frantically called for an ambulance. When we arrived at the hospital, the doctor looked at my niece with a grim expression. We'll do everything we can, but the situation is extremely dire. At that moment, I received a call from my husband, informing me that my sister-in-law wasn't at home. What on earth is she doing? Isn't she supposed to be a mother? Anger surged within me at her irresponsibility. As I thought about my niece, clinging to life in the treatment room, I decided right then and there to make Allison pay for what she'd done. First, I started coordinating with Luke to track down my sister-in-law's whereabouts. A week later, my husband and I found ourselves at Allison's apartment. We watched from the window as she returned home, lugging a large suitcase behind her. What? Huh? The sound of the door unlocking was followed by Allison's confused voice. She must have been surprised to see unfamiliar shoes lined up in the entrance. She stormed toward us, furious. What the hell is this? Why are you in my house without permission? This is outrageous. As soon as she opened the living room door and saw me and Luke, she shouted. Right back at you. You entered my home without permission and put Maddie, who had a high fever, in the fridge.
You're disgusting.
And how exactly did you even get into our house? When I asked, Allison averted her eyes. The door was open, so I just went in. She muttered. I held up something for her to see. Don't lie. You had a spare key made without our permission, didn't you? What? That's ridiculous. What I showed her was a receipt from a locksmith that had been carelessly left on her table. The confident front she'd put up crumbled the moment she saw it. A while ago, my husband had lost our house key. Luke had assumed he'd simply dropped it somewhere, but it mysteriously reappeared on our entryway shelf the next day. We had found it odd at the time. The date of that receipt matches the day the key went missing. Care to explain? Well, I just thought it'd be safer to have a spare key in case of an emergency. I was going to tell you, but I guess I forgot. Allison stammered, trying to come up with excuses, but we hadn't come here to debate that. Why did you do it? Putting Maddie, with a high fever, in the fridge? What were you thinking? Allison briefly lowered her eyes, then raised them again to meet ours. I couldn't cancel my travel plans, and since she had a fever, my parents refused to take her in. She said this as if it were the most natural thing in the world. So, I had to make a spare key in a hurry. Besides, cooler air lowers body temperature, doesn't it? Allison laughed as she spoke, completely unaware of the severity of her actions.
You.
Luke, calm down. I quickly stopped my husband, who looked ready to grab her. Allison, meanwhile, watched us nonchalantly, twirling her hair around her finger. How can you be so indifferent? Maddie wasn't breathing when I found her, and she had to be rushed to the hospital by ambulance. You've got to be kidding. Her face turned pale, and she looked to both me and Luke, pleading with her eyes.
Tell me you're lying, big brother.
Luke shook his head and told her it was true. Only then did she seem to grasp the gravity of the situation. She covered her mouth with both hands and began to cry. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by Allison's sobs. After a while, she suddenly snapped. What the hell are you going to do about this? What was the point of leaving Maddie with you if things ended up like this? She had the audacity to blame me. I swallowed the urge to shout back and stared at her intently. Where have you been? What were you doing? Your phone was off, and you actually went overseas, didn't you? I asked, doing my best to stay calm, but she refused to answer. Fine. Then I'll tell you. Huh? I pulled out a stack of photos from an envelope I had prepared and spread them out on the table. You went on a romantic getaway with this man, didn't you? Allison stared at the photos in my hand before grabbing them. What is this? She shouted. The photos clearly showed her with another man. I had grown suspicious when her clothes were too flashy the day she left Maddie with us, so I'd followed her. My instincts were spot on. She was caught in an embrace with a man, boldly hugging him on the street before they entered a neon-lit hotel. This is an invasion of privacy. She crumpled the photos in her hand and began to tremble with rage. Calm down. I have more. I pulled out my phone and showed her something. Having fun, were you? It was a series of social media posts Allison had made during her trip. In each photo, she struck a pose, beaming. Though the man's face wasn't visible, he was clearly standing beside her. Tracking my social media? That's creepy. You must have way too much free time. You're the one who showed me your account, remember? She tried to corner me with her accusation, but I was quick to reply. I recalled the time she had taken one of my dresses without asking, saying, "Clothes look better on someone young and cute." That's when I remembered her account name, and it didn't take much to find her posts during the trip. Sure enough, they gave me all the evidence I needed. Who would have thought she'd slip up in such a way? Realizing she was in a tight spot, Allison finally fell silent. But then, as if something had just occurred to her, she lifted her head and smirked. That was my husband I went with. You can't just assume I was on a romantic trip. She looked at me triumphantly. Just then, The door connecting the living room to the next room slammed open. Huh? What's going on? Her confusion was evident.
I didn't go on any trip.
The man standing in the doorway was Allison's husband, Tim. Why are you here? Weren't you at work? I called him after Maddie was taken to the hospital. He came as soon as he could. You had no right. Her voice, once strong, had weakened significantly. He's the one who let us into the apartment. Unlike you, we don't break into other people's homes. Tim stepped forward, glaring fiercely at Allison.
Maddie was in a critical condition that day. You'd been telling me how hard you were working as a mom every day. So, what was this?
His fury was clear, and he began to berate her. But then Allison seemed to realize something and cut him off. Wait a second. She interrupted Tim. If she was in danger, does that mean she's still alive? Yes. Maddie pulled through. Thanks to the tireless efforts of the doctors, my niece had survived. By now, she had been discharged and was staying with Tim's parents.
I can't stay with someone as despicable as you any longer.
Tim thrust divorce papers toward Allison. No. She's fine now, so what's the problem?
Everything's the problem. And I know you've been asking your brother for money, claiming I don't earn enough. Isn't that right?
Tim presented a certain document to Allison. Where did you get this from? Did you go through my things without asking? You're the worst.
Didn't you also go into Abby's closet and take her clothes without permission?
Allison was at a loss for words and couldn't argue back. What Tim handed her was a credit card statement and an invoice, with an astonishingly high amount listed.
You've been spending recklessly, couldn't make the payments, borrowed money from a loan shark, and then turned to your brother for help with repayment, right?
That's not. Tim had been providing more than enough for household expenses, and Allison was in charge of managing the budget. Realizing she could no longer make excuses, Allison slumped to the floor. Please forgive me. Parenting is so stressful. I felt so lonely, so I went out to take my mind off things.
That's why I asked you to come with me, didn't I? You just wanted to enjoy yourself while I wasn't around, right?
That's not it. She desperately tried to apologize, but it was clear Tim wasn't going to forgive her. Seeing no way out, Allison clung to my legs. Abby, please say something. You know how much I loved Maddie. Tell him. She cried, pleading for me to intervene. I'm afraid that's not possible. I've already reported everything to the police and child services. Please, don't say that. Help me. Luke, you too. What you did was inexcusable, not just as a parent but as a human being. You need to reflect on that deeply. When I said that firmly, Allison sobbed. Why? And collapsed, crying on the floor. After that, she was questioned by the police and eventually arrested. Tim and Allison's divorce was finalized, and as a result of her actions, she lost custody of Maddie. Tim would be the one raising their daughter from then on. In addition, She was ordered to pay $30,000 in damages for her affair and $300 a month in child support. Both Tim's parents and my husband and I cut all ties with her. After losing everyone she could rely on, Allison now leads a life working manual labor by day and at a hostess club by night, struggling to keep up with payments and barely finding time to rest. But, honestly, what happens to her from here on out is no concern of ours. On the other hand, we received some wonderful news. It turns out I'm pregnant, and our baby is expected to arrive in just a few days. My husband and I are looking forward to protecting and raising our child with love. How did you find this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'll see you all in the next video.